Good morning. We are continuing with our chapter 6 in our history books. Let's start off by reviewing those key words. Let's not do the push on here. It's too loud. Let's review our key words. Our first one, westward expansion. What does it mean when we go on that westward expansion, Gabby? Yeah, when the settlers went from that east coast where the first states were, those first 13 original colonies, they moved west. So the westward expansion was going into the Midwest where Minnesota is, all the way to the west where where California is. All right, a treaty. What is the treaty? Oh, I love that. Gabby is right on her game here, but let's call him someone else. Josie. That's that written agreement by two or more nations. So the alliance was more informal. Hey, let's help each other out. A treaty is a formal agreement. It's written down. And a treaty needs to be ratified. What does it mean to ratify something, Sam? Yeah, it's approved formally, not just one person saying, oh, we should do this. It's the leaders formally approving it, saying this is what is going to happen. What is a territory, Brian?
A part of the United States that is not within a state, but is organized with its own governing leaders.
Yeah, so it's a part of the United States that's not a part of an actual state. So when we were talking about that westward expansion, it's when they were going across all of those lands that weren't states yet, they became territories first. Then they became states of the United States. We still have territories, not in the continental U.S. from coast to coast. Those are all states. But we have Guam and Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. So we have other territories. Other countries also can have territories. What we're focusing on in this chapter is the United States territories, the United States territories. There are other countries that have territories. When Great Britain first came over and settled in North America, those first 13 colonies, they were territories of Great Britain. And then we fought for our own freedom and became our own country, but we started out as a territory of Great Britain. So other countries do have territories also. What does annuity mean, Andrea?
Annuity is an annual payment of food and money that the U.S. government pays to American Indians from the land.
Yeah, it's that annual payment that they gave to the American Indians, food and money, because they wanted the land. That westward expansion, manifest destiny, we want to go from coast to coast. So in order to get the land from the American Indians, they gave them food and money. And then they told them where they had to live. What do we call that, Paul?
A reservation, which is the land set aside by the U.S. government to the Americans.
Yeah. So it's the land that the U.S. government said, okay, we're giving you food and money. Now you have to go to this reserved land that we've set aside, this reservation, and you have to live in this reservation. We'll give you food and money, but you don't have free control over all the land that you used to go on. What is a debt, Colin?
It's like something that is owed that includes your services.
Yeah, it's something that you owe. You have a debt to someone else. You owe them. It could be money, it could be goods, it could be a service. And our last one is that assimilation. Ethan. Yeah, it's adopting the values and habits of the larger group. So the American Indians are sometimes, we're going to see how they assimilate into the white settlers' culture. So they're going to adopt the values and live with the same habits of the white settlers. But if they stay on that reservation, then they get to try to keep their own culture. So we're going to see it's going to be hard for the American Indians. Do we keep our culture? Do we live how we've always lived? or do we need to assimilate into this larger group? So let's go to where we left off yesterday. We left off on page 101 at the bottom, the first land deal. So at the very bottom of page 101. I'm going to read because I'm recording this one. In 1805, a young U.S. Army officer named Zebulon Pike traveled with 20 soldiers up the Mississippi River. He had been sent by the U.S. government to acquire land on which to build a fort. Pike camped on a flat, sandy island where the Minnesota River joined the Mississippi River. This area was important to the Dakota. They called it Mendota, the place where two rivers meet. Believed by many Dakota to be the place of origin of their people, Mendota had long been a place for celebrations and trade. It was here that they began a new relationship with the United States. 7 Dakota leaders who lived near Mendota met with Pike. He told them that he had been sent by the United States to find a good place for a fort. Pike gave gifts of clothing and tools to the leaders. He then asked to purchase land so that the United States could build a fort. The fort would be a base for military soldiers, government agents, and fur traders. The 7 Dakota leaders discussed the offer. Not all of them agreed that selling their land was a good idea. Finally, just 2 of their leaders, Little Crow III, or Satan, Wakwamani, and he sees standing up, or Wanega Inazazi, signed a document granting the United States 2 small but important pieces of land. One was at the mouth of the St. Croix River, where it joined the Mississippi River. The other ran along both sides of the Mississippi from the mouth of the Minnesota River north to the Falls of St. Anthony. Pike gave out $200 worth of trade goods, but the 2 sides did not agree on a final price for the land treaty. The next step was for the United States Senate to ratify or approve the 1805 treaty. They finally did so in 1808 and decided to pay the Dakota $2,000 for the land. It was the first time that the United States acquired land from the native people of Minnesota. The U.S. government did not send payments or take possession of the land immediately. It was not until 1819 that soldiers arrived to build a fort on the land that Zebulon Pike had bought from the Dakota. The fort would eventually be called Fort Snelling. So this is the first time that they bought land from the Dakota. So this is a really big deal. Fort Snelling is a really big deal. It's at a very important place at the Mendota where the 2 rivers meet. And we're going to find out what is important about that. So Fort Snelling was a military base, but its soldiers were not there to fight. Oftentimes when we think of a fort, we think of battles that happen, people wanting to overtake the fort. That's not what Fort Snelling was about. Their main job was to enforce U.S. laws related to the fur trade. The United States believed the fort would help protect the U.S. fur trade from the British and would also help keep peace between the Dakota and the Ojibwe. So Fort Snelling's purpose wasn't to be a fighting fort, it was to be kind of a peacekeeping fort. They wanted to keep peace with the fur traders and with the American Indians. More than 200 U.S. soldiers lived and worked at Fort Snelling in the 1820s. Their main responsibility was building the fort itself, a task that took 5 years. They built it high on the bluff above the confluence or meeting of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. 4 defensive towers and an imposing stone wall enclosed the fort. Just west of the fort was the headquarters of Indian agent Lawrence Talifer. The Indian agent worked with the military to keep the fur trade operating smoothly for business such as the American Fur Company. Talifer also managed the U.S. government's relations with the Ojibwe and the Dakota, resolved disputes between American Indians and fur traders. Talifer welcomed the Dakota and Ojibwe day and night. He conducted business with them through a translator or an interpreter, since he spoke neither Ojibwe nor Dakota. So Talifer's job was super important. He helped keep the peace in the area. Okay, so there's a lot going on with the fur trade. We've got the biggest rivers, the Minnesota and the Mississippi, coming together. So there's lots of traffic on the rivers with the voyagers traveling by their canoes. So his job was to keep the peace with all the people that was going through that area. The fur trade at Mendota. Across the river at Mendota, the American Fur Company built its local headquarters. Each year, traders from all over the region brought furs to Mendota. There, furs were counted and packaged before being sent to eastern cities to be sold. It was the busiest and most successful trading center in the upper Mississippi region. In 1835, traders brought in more than 290,000 muskrats, as well as thousands of pelts from other animals such as beaver, mink, and deer. The head of the entire American Fur Company operation in Minnesota was Henry Hastings Sibley. He was a successful businessman who began as a clerk, but by the age of 23, he was already a partner. So think about that. 23 is pretty young. You're just graduating college now. He's already become a partner in a trading company. Sibley understood the importance of building kinship ties with his suppliers, the Dakota. While living at Mendota, he had a relationship with Red Blanket Woman, granddaughter of a local Dakota chief. Together they had one daughter. This strengthened his connection to his Dakota neighbors. So we talked about that in the fur trade chapter, about how those European fur traders recognized the importance of the culture of the Dakota and the Ojibwe, and those kinship ties making them family. So he became family with the local Dakota. Surrounding this American outpost was the Dakota Nation. The two closest settlements were the Mdewakanton villages of Little Crow and Black Dog, both named after Dakota leaders. Down the Mississippi River and up the Minnesota River stood dozens more Dakota villages. This was Dakota land. For now, Americans could live only on the land purchased by Pike in 1805, but this would change in the coming decades. So look at that map. All of that dark yellow is present-day Minnesota. But look at all of those tribes that lived in that land. This was all Dakota land. So the Dakota controlled the whole area, and the settlers could only live in the places where Pike had bought the land, so around Fort Snelling area. So most of the area was controlled by the Dakota. Is it like that today? Is most of Minnesota one big reservation? No. So a lot of change is going to happen. Let's look at the purple box. Location matters. Many people recognize the value of places where two rivers come together. The Dakota call these places Bedote, an English word with similar meaning to confluence. So in English, we call the two rivers coming together a confluence. In Dakota, it's called Bedote. And a few years ago, they changed the names of one of the lakes in Minneapolis to something Bedote. But I know that Bedote was in it. It's a big, long Ojibwe word. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'm going to have to look that up. But Bedote, I'm starting to see more and more around the Minneapolis area. Rivers and the military. In 1805, men representing the U.S. government traveled by boat up the Mississippi River to the region that is now Minnesota. When they arrived at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, they saw it was a place of strategic importance. We're going to find out why this was a key area for them to have. High bluffs along the shores provided excellent protection from attack by the British. The bluffs also offered a bird's eye view of the two rivers and anyone traveling on them. Fort Snelling was built high on the bluff above the confluence so the military could control the river. So if we think about how that river goes, I need this table to stop with all of the interactions. It's very distracting to me. So the rivers kind of dig into the land, and the rivers sit down lower because as the water flows, it erodes away and it gets lower and lower, and the bluffs go up from the river. So they built the Fort Snelling. They built the fort up on top of the bluff so they can see down the Mississippi River, down the Minnesota River. So they have that bird's eye view. They're up high and they can see far. They also are protected from attack. So the example I used with the other class, not something that we do here at school, because we know we don't play King of the Snow Hill here at school because there's no pushing. But think about it, if you're up on the bluff, it's like being at the top of the snow hill. If somebody's trying to come up to attack you, to get control of the snow hill, you push them down the hill. So think about the same thing for the military fort. The soldiers are up at the top of the bluff. If the British come on the river, because we know it's a lot easier to travel by water, if their boat comes and they try to climb up the bluff, is it going to be easy to push them down?
Yes.
Yeah, so this was a very strategic place for the U.S. government to get. Fort Snelling was very, it was put there very purposely. So they could control that waterway. They had a good protection. Can you climb up a bluff? Sure, you can climb up. It doesn't say that you can't. It's just easy to protect because you're going to be at the top, just like King of the Snow Hill. You're at the top of the snow hill and you can protect people trying to overtake your spot. But we don't do that here at school. Yesterday we were talked to about behavior on the snow hills. I want to hear that we are behaving today at recess. Rivers and port towns. Fur traders also saw the importance of this place. In the early 1800s, they built a trading post across the Minnesota River from Fort Snelling. They called it Mendota, an English interpretation of Bedote. So Mendota, Bedote, they sound very similar. So Mendota, think about Mendota Heights. How many have heard of that town here in Minnesota? Mendota Heights. It's over by Fort Snelling. Mendota is this trading post. As the fur trade grew, Mendota gained importance as a port town, receiving tons of trade goods and shipping out tons of furs. However, by the 1840s, St. Paul outgrew Mendota and replaced it as the region's primary port. So Mendota was the first big city, okay, but then St. Paul got bigger and bigger. What's the capital of Minnesota? St. Paul. So it took on more importance. It's sitting right at the Mississippi there. Let's see. Yep, I already read page 105. So let's look at page 106. Different perspectives. As the people living in and around Fort Snelling looked around them, they saw different things. The value of resources. To the Dakota, as well as to the Ojibwe living farther north, Minnesota was home. They believed that it belonged to the people who lived there, just as the people belonged to it. The land held the graves of their ancestors and the places of their sacred tradition. It provided the food and other resources necessary for survival. The area's rivers supplied fish and fresh water, as well as a means for travel. To many of the American newcomers, Minnesota looked like a land of resources from which to benefit. Forested lands could provide timber for new construction. The open prairies with fertile soil could be made into farms. The rivers could serve as both transportation routes and sources of power, used to operate lumber and flour mills. Land could be divided into lots and then sold. Individuals could buy this property and build houses and businesses. So you can see a different way of living. The American Indians thought, you know what, this land belongs to us and we belong to the land. We work together with the earth. Okay? The earth provides for us and we take care of the earth. The newcomers, the Europeans, Americans that are settling on the land are seeing it differently. They're seeing it as, what can I get from the land, not what can I give back. They're seeing it as, I can own this and it can be my area. That brings us into the land ownership. The Dakota and the Ojibwe view the land ownership differently than Europeans and Americans did. In Ojibwe and Dakota societies, individuals did not own land. Instead, groups controlled an area of land and the resources on it. Sometimes the Dakota and Ojibwe and other American Indian nations made agreements with each other, as the Ojibwe and Dakota had in 1679, to share land and resources. Other times they fought to protect their hunting land or village sites from takeover. So the Dakota and the Ojibwe didn't own their little pieces of land. They didn't say that, oh, this area of land is mine, the buffalo are on my land, only I can hunt the buffalo right now because they're on my land. No, it was the land was owned by all the Dakota or by all the Ojibwe. So they worked together on the land. So they didn't own those small little pieces of property. They shared it with each other. Changing times. For more than 150 years, European and American fur trading companies had profited from the furs provided by the Dakota and Ojibwe. Now, major changes were happening in the area. Some were economic and others geographic. In the 1830s, the demand for furs started to drop, and the fur trade was becoming less profitable. At the same time, westward expansion started to increase dramatically. To make room for more settlers, the U.S. government wanted the lands of the Ojibwe and the Dakota. They didn't need it for the fur trade business anymore. That was starting to drop. They weren't getting the money from the fur trade business, so they didn't need the hunters and the trappers that the Dakota and the Ojibwe were providing those services. They didn't need them anymore. Now they just wanted the land. They wanted to own and be able to have settlers in that westward expansion. They wanted to grow the country. So what the U.S. government wants is very different now than what it had wanted before. So we're going to see a lot of big changes coming. With that, we're going to say goodbye to our friends that are at home and hope that you have a good day and that you are doing well. And we will hopefully see you soon.